Good evening and welcome to tonight's Zoom webinar. I'm Vicki Honeyman. I'm a bookseller at Literati Bookstore. I'm very proud to present Claire Fuller to our At Home with Literati series in support of Unsettled Ground, her brand new novel that just has been released. She's joined in conversation by Cal Flyn. For our attendees, so you know this chat is closed, but you can keep the chat window open during the event, as I will be dropping links to purchase Unsettled Ground from Literati throughout the event. And you can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit questions at any time, and then I will ask a selection of the questions that you've submitted at the conclusion of the conversation that Claire and Cal are going to have. So that'll happen around 6:45. A reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com for either curbside pickup if you live in Southeast Michigan, or to have any books that you order shipped to your home anywhere in the US. In lieu of a book purchase, we'd like you to consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. Whether you'd like to think of this as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our programming, you can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we thank you for your attendance this evening, and so happy that we're able to do this live and be able to represent amazing writers throughout the world. I'm going to introduce you to tonight's author and moderator right now, Claire Fuller, who's there in the red sweater. Was born in Oxfordshire, England in 1967. In addition to her current novel, Unsettled Ground, she has written the books Our Endless Numbered Days, which won the Desmond Elliott Prize. Swimming Lessons and Bitter Orange are her other novels. She has an MA in creative and critical writing from the University of Winchester and lives in Hampshire with her husband, Tim, and her 2 children. Hello, Claire. Hello. Cal Flyn there in the black sweater with the beautifully arranged books by color behind her. Cal is an author and journalist from the Highlands of Scotland. Her most recent book is Islands of Abandonment, just came out on Viking. She has reported for the Sunday Times in the UK and the Daily Telegraph, and writes regularly for publications including Granta and The Guardian. Her first book, Thicker Than Water, was a Times Book of the Year and dealt with the colonization of Australia and questions of inherited guilt. She's been made a MacDowell Fellow in 2019 and currently lives in the Orkney Islands. I'm now going to turn the chat over to Claire and Cal. I'm going to stop my video and enjoy.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Vicki. So Claire Fuller's new book, Unsettled Ground, portrays the adult twins Jeannie and Julius as they're prized from rural seclusion, forced into contention with modern society in the wake of their mother's sudden death. Though well-versed in the arts of gardening, housekeeping, and folk music, neither is well prepared for the financial, administrative, and social hurdles they now face, and nor are they prepared for the tangled web of untruths that Dot has left for them to uncover. Of the 2, Jeannie is perhaps least equipped to make her way in the world, having struggled with literacy and with fear of her weak heart from a young age. Frightened to face the world alone, but too proud to ask for help, it's she we follow through the tumultuous and grief-stricken weeks that follow their mother's death. It's a stunning novel from one of Britain's best and most brilliant writers, and one that really deeply affected me. Unsettled Ground shows our rural communities as they really are: complex, storied, and densely intertwined. It's been shortlisted already for the Women's Prize, and it's wonderful to see this book finding the recognition it deserves. So welcome, Claire.
Thank you very much. I want you to email me that introduction, because then I might just pinch it. It's much better than the introduction I normally give.
Well, it's just such a delight to see you this evening, Claire. And I wonder, maybe we could start by talking about those two characters right at the heart of the book, Jeannie and Julius. And could you tell me how they came to be and how you got to know them?
Well, they came to be because I had found a place that was the inspiration. So the characters came just slightly after that, or Jeannie came slightly after that. So I came across, or my son took me to a caravan in the woods not too far from where I live that had been dilapidated and vandalized. But it was a really, really interesting place, very atmospheric, and it just made me think who had lived there, and that's what in my mind created the character Jeannie. And I don't plan my novels, so I didn't immediately know that she would be a twin, or that she would be 51, or that she would be living at home. I didn't start with the caravan because I wanted to understand what had taken her there. So I kind of went back in time a little bit and actually start the novel with her mother, because it felt, I don't know, it's really hard to say where it comes from, but it felt like I needed to know a little bit about Dot to begin with before I found out more about Jeannie. But all my characters, really, I find out about them as I'm writing. So I discover them kind of on the page in the same way that a reader does. But I do have to know them really well, in more detail than makes it into the book. You know, I have to know more about them, and not everything gets in there because it's just not relevant to the story. So some of that is kind of cut out later, perhaps, if I think, well, I've discovered this about Jeannie, but I don't, it just doesn't work in the narrative. And sometimes when I feel I've got to a stage where I don't know the character well enough, or they're doing something that I think, why are you doing that? You know, even, I don't know, it's how she's behaving with a particular character, or, you know, maybe even when I was realizing that she struggles to read and write, you know, I want to find out more about that. So what I will sometimes do is open a new Word document different to the work in progress, and start questioning her on the page as I type. And it is almost as if Jeannie answers me back. So I ask her a question, and I type, and the answer comes back to me. It's very odd, because it does feel as if it's not coming from me, but that is kind of one way that I find out more about them. But as I write, as I become more involved in a book, I become, I think, quite obsessed by it, really, and those characters inhabit me no matter what I'm doing, even if I'm not at my computer writing. So, you know, I'm eating some toast for breakfast, and I think, what would Jeannie have on her toast? You know, is she a Marmite person, or is she a marmalade person? And that all day, that's going on in my head. I have to hide it from my family, because otherwise they know that I'm not really actually listening to what they're saying. Yeah, but I guess that's how I get to know them.
Absolutely. And you know, you touched on Jeannie's illiteracy there, and that's another thing I wanted to mention. You know, this is a book in many ways about rural poverty, which represents in a very different way to poverty in a town or city. Could you talk a little bit about the decision to deal with rural poverty as a theme?
That also came later, or came accidentally, because once I knew that Jeannie was going to end up in this caravan. That wouldn't be the end of the novel, but at some point I would get her there. And this isn't going to be a very nice place to live. It's going to be very difficult to live, because there's no electricity, there's no running water, there's no sanitation. So the chances are she's going to be struggling financially. So I kind of knew all that. So I had to create situations that would take her to the caravan and beyond it. So really the rural poverty came out of that, rather than it being a theme that I wanted to tackle. But once I had reached the end of the first draft, which takes about a year and a half, something like that, I understood what the themes were by that stage, obviously, and could see that rural poverty runs throughout the whole of this novel, really. And at the time that I was writing it, I started looking for fiction that also covered similar themes, because I do like to read while I'm writing, read books that cover the same thing, and I couldn't find any. So I thought that was actually really interesting, and that made me want to write about this subject even more. And I did lots and lots of research around it, because it did feel that in the media, in fiction, in non-fiction, it is, you're right, all about urban poverty, certainly in England. I think it is slightly different in the US, because feels like there's a lot more literature about rural poverty. But over here, that's certainly not the case. And so the research I started to do was really looking into kind of government papers and official research about what was closing in the countryside and what effect that might have. And things like rural schools closing, bus services being reduced, telephone boxes disappearing or being changed into libraries, or having defibrillators put in them, and medical centres closing. So there was lots of, it was quite dry information, but lots of information about that. But none of it really related to individuals and what the impact was on any particular family. So I had to find other ways of finding that out. And I spoke several times to a community nurse who actually worked in the area that the book is set. And we had, without her saying anything about her clients, obviously, and the people she looked after, but we talked about the things that those kinds of communities face, and those kinds of individuals who don't have access to lots of things that we take for granted, the challenges that they face as well. So I went about that, researching that theme and considering that theme, I think, in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, maybe you could give us a flavor of the book itself by giving us a short reading.
Yeah, of course. I am going to read. In fact, this is a bit I haven't ever read before, so we'll see what happens. But most of this, so Jeannie thinks that they are going to be evicted from the cottage, and she feels she needs to prepare for it. And she's trying to work out what she needs to take if that's the case, because they don't have any transport. And so, what can she take out of a whole house? And then there's a kind of memory in the middle of it. On Sunday morning, after Jeannie hears Julius leave for a relief milking job he's managed to get for a couple of days, she goes downstairs in her nightie and dressing gown. She's barely slept for thinking about what might happen tomorrow. Every time she has tried to talk to her brother about the impending eviction, they've argued. In the early hours, she decided that she would get some things together, just a couple of boxes in case they really do have to leave tomorrow. She tells herself this isn't giving up, it's being prepared. But what do you pack when you don't know where you're going or for how long? There had been a day in that long, feverish time when she was about 6 and off school that she had woken on the sofa to see a man standing at the kitchen table, stuffing a slice of bread and butter into his mouth. The coat he wore was tied closed with a length of string, and crumbs had fallen into his grey beard, which was long enough to lie on his chest. His sour odour reached her across the room, and when Jeannie cried out, the man shoveled the food in faster, pieces of ham, and then a whole hard-boiled egg, which he didn't stop to peel, his eyes darting and his cheeks bulging. Another egg went into his coat pocket, followed by an apple. At Jeannie's cry, her mother hurried in from the scullery. and the tramp, perhaps used to being chased away, made a few steps towards the front door. "Mr. Jackson," Dot said calmly, "won't you sit down to eat?" She pulled out a chair, and cautiously the man sat. "Mr. Jackson is our guest, Jeanette. He's come to tea." Her mother returned to the scullery for more food, and Mr. Jackson relaxed and popped the hard-boiled egg whole out of his mouth, shell intact. He put it in one ear and drew it out of the other before tapping it on the table and peeling it. She remembers, dropped by the table leg, his canvas bag, his only belongings apart from the clothes he wore. What, she wonders now, did he carry with him? In the scullery, Jeannie stands for a long time watching a beam of sunlight slide across the farmhouse sink. If they're evicted tomorrow, what will they do about their mother's body? They can't leave it and risk it being discovered, but they certainly can't take it with them. Jeannie doesn't have a solution. With a gasp and a rush of energy, she goes into the old dairy, where half a dozen flattened cardboard boxes have been shoved in a corner. The cardboard is damp, and it takes her an age to find a roll of parcel tape, but she makes them up and packs them with plates and other pieces of essential crockery wrapped in towels. She tucks in the portable radio, the torch, cutlery, 2 saucepans and a frying pan, as well as whatever food she has in the cupboards. Angel's painting of Maud is secured with an elastic band and placed on top. On Tuesday, she tells herself, she will be unpacking everything and putting it back on the shelves, laughing at her own caution. She stuffs another box with 2 sleeping bags, spare pillows and blankets, and puts everything in the old dairy. She is only preparing because she can't bear to be unprepared.
Thank you, Claire. That's wonderful. And I think that touches on something that I was going to ask you about, actually, that sort of sense of connection to land, and how that differs from land ownership, which they do not do. We talk a little bit about, well, Jeannie very physically has a connection to the land in as much as she is a very passionate gardener and a skilled gardener. And I think that their connection to the land is also made very literal through the interment of their mother. Could you talk a little bit about, I suppose, the characters' feelings towards the place that they're from, and perhaps by extension, your own feelings towards the place?
I think, although they don't technically own this cottage or the land, I think they've gardened it, farmed it almost, and lived their whole lives for 51 years. I think they feel as if it is theirs, and they certainly act as if it is theirs. You know, they don't really ever ask their landlord for any help, or if they want to make any decisions, they don't ask for his permission. I mean, they do believe that this cottage, under some arrangement, is theirs for their lives without any rent to pay, but it's still not quite the same as ownership. And it was really important to me to highlight the difference between Jeannie and Julius's, first of all, assumption, but their connection with this land and the kind of vegetables they've grown for so many years, you know, looking after the land really well, you know, rotating vegetables, growing them in the greenhouse, transferring them to the polytunnel, you know, it's a very skilled job, really. And the contrast between that and also the Rawsons, who are their landlords, who farm and kind of drive around, and we don't really ever see them doing any farming. You know, they hire people really to do their farming. And then also another character called Saffron, who has inherited her house or has bought it with some money that her father left her, who has a huge garden that she doesn't know anything, doesn't have a clue what to do with. It's just one piece of enormous grass. And so she hires Jeannie to give her some advice and to do the gardening. And it felt like, you know, those kinds of 3 ways of looking at the land were, for me, were quite interesting. And then also there's another character, Bridget, who lives in an ex-council house and has a very small garden, which she doesn't really do anything with, and is a bit of a mess. But Jeannie and Julius, they regard this land as theirs, and Jeannie's connection to it, and through that, her connection with her mother is really strong. So there's a point in the novel where she finds her mother's gardening gloves, and you know those kinds of leathery gardening gloves, when they get wet, they take the shape of your hands, and so she discovers them and she puts them on almost as if she is wearing the skin of her mother, and these were the things that her mother worked the land with. So, and all after she's evicted, all Jeannie wants is to get back home, to get back to this garden. That is her driving force. If she had been rehomed and had to go to a city, I find it almost impossible to imagine Jeannie in a city. They are part of the land. They inform the place, and the place informs them, really.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, you mentioned Dot there, and Dot, I think, in many ways, the mystery of Dot forms the heart of the novel, or she's there as a negative presence throughout. And I am sort of interested in the way that this book essentially does function as a mystery. I read an interview with you somewhere else in which you describe, you said, for close readers, all the clues are there in the first chapter, which I found really interesting. I mean, I have heard some writers talk about mysteries as sort of engines that power a plot forward. Is that how you were thinking about it?
Not particularly, because I think when you write a book that is fits in the mystery genre, that the fun for the reader and the challenge for the reader is seeing the mystery unfold and maybe try to anticipate it and guess it and get it wrong or get it right. And I think in that way, the mystery does drive the plot. But for me, I think the mystery is a side element for me in this novel. If readers see it a different way, then that's absolutely fine. But for me, the mystery was really Jeannie's, and it's about her discovering the things that had been held from her and the things she misconstrued and didn't understand and weren't explained. Because it's quite possible that the reader, even if they don't pick up on them in the first chapter, they will guess it. And I don't have any problem with them guessing it. Some reviews, I do read all my reviews, even kind of on Goodreads, and lots of readers do say, but I guessed what was coming. And that I don't have a problem with that, but for me that wasn't the whole point of it. But a mystery does help in terms of pace, certainly. For me, it doesn't drive the plot, but it can make it a little bit pacier, because people want to find out what happens and want to see whether what they guessed is correct, and that keeps them reading, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose that sense of mystery, I mean, I'm a non-fiction writer, so I always look on what fiction writers do with a sense of wonder, and that idea of writing mystery and knowing how much to give away and so on seems a great mystery to me. I mean, do you have a lot of feedback on writing as you go?
Yeah, I do, because that is the hardest thing. Am I being too heavy-handed and too clunky with these clues and this foreshadowing, or am I being so subtle that no one will have a clue what I'm talking about? And because I know the solution and the reveal, and I can't, it's almost impossible for me to tell how subtle or not I'm being. So I absolutely rely on other readers to help me with that. And I'm in a writing group, so they read my work. We meet every month, and I usually send them a a chapter, and they obviously send me their work and we critique it, and then we meet. And that I'm not sure I would be a writer without that group in a way, or I'm not sure how I would do it, because there's 10 of us, and if 7 people are saying that, that just didn't work, or I had no idea that you were hinting at this, Claire, then I know that I need to change it. But if 7 of them kind of say, yes, this worked, then I'm probably okay. But after I finish the first draft, then I have 2 or 3 trusted readers from that group who will read the whole novel for me. But again, they aren't seeing it with completely fresh eyes, so they do know some of the things. So then my adult children also read it, and my husband. And then finally, once I've kind of sorted out all the things that they've suggested, then it goes to my agent, and then finally to my editors. So there are lots of people who get to see it and say, no, I guess what that was.
I do like that, and I think a lot of writers would love to have. I think it sounds like you have a lot of people who you are able to trust in that way and trust the opinions of, and I think that is really sort of worth its weight in gold. I think that's a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah.
I mean, how long does this process take? I mean, do you have a certain time frame in which you tend to write your novels?
They might take about 2 years, so a year and a half to write the first draft, and then 6 months of edits and revisions, something like that, sometimes a bit longer. And I always try to finish the first draft of the next novel before the previous one is published.
Oh, clever.
Because the publishing, I don't know what it's like for you, whether you're, once a non-fiction book is sold, whether it takes a long time to come to publication, but it certainly does for me.
Concept, yeah. So it's a very different process because you sell the proposal and then you work on
Yes.
it for the whole time. But I sort of wish that I had thought ahead and started writing the new thing quite a long time ago.
And every time that's worked so far, I have finished the first draft before the previous novel was finished, apart from with this book. So I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through the next book. So I haven't finished the first draft. And the deadlines I set are my own. My publishers, Tin House in the US and Penguin in the UK, just buy one book at a time. So they have first refusal. So they see the book and decide if they want to buy it. And luckily, so far, they've bought every one. So yeah. So that's kind of the publishing process, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's turn back to the book itself again, because one thing that I wanted to talk about, particularly in terms of Jeannie, was her pride. I think that's one of her most defining features, and this almost unwillingness to ask for help, sometimes even to accept it when sort of freely offered. And I'm thinking particularly of a scene towards the end of the book when a volunteer driver picks her up to take her to a hospital. And I'll quote, "She senses that she expects her to thank him, to be grateful for his charity in order that he can feel better about himself, and she won't do it." Sometimes, as a reader, I wanted her to take any help she could get and do or say anything she needs to get it. But I sense that would cost her something that she's not yet ready to give up. Is that fair?
Absolutely, that's fair. Yes, I think she is her mother's daughter, and her mother has taught her that you don't take anything from anybody, even if it's freely offered, because the chances are they'll want something in return, and often something greater. So she has definitely learnt that lesson from her mother. But I hope that there are lots and lots of instances where she turns down help. But for me, kind of the story arc for Jeannie is that by the end of the book, she understands that nobody can get by without help, and that it's absolutely fine to take it and to give that back in return. But she is a very proud woman. But I tried really to get inside her head and to understand about turning things down. But I also did some research into, perhaps people who haven't first of all haven't been to university, haven't had a secondary education, and have kind of charitable works thrust upon them. There was a great podcast, and I can't remember who it was by now, but it was talking about all these subjects, and about the working class, really, and about how the middle classes and maybe the upper classes fall back on the bank of mum and dad, as we call it, and don't even notice that they're doing that. And because that help is there, and they just take it for granted, me included. And for people like Jeannie, they just don't have access to that. So my example in Unsettled Ground really is that Saffron, this woman who has inherited her house, her mother babysits her child in order that Saffron can go and get an education, and she doesn't pay her mother. Her mother is happy to do that, and neither of them, I don't think, kind of think that what happens if you don't have that. And then there was, on this podcast, there was also a section about people accepting charity and how often the giver, the person giving the charity, wants something back in return, and what they want is thanks. And what they want, because they want to feel good about themselves, and a way of feeling good about themselves is the person receiving the charity being kind of humble and saying thank you. And so sometimes, the person giving the charity wants that, they're only doing it in order to get that, in order to feel good about themselves, and to be able to say to someone else, oh, I'm a volunteer driver taking people to hospital, aren't I good? I thought that, I'd never really considered that before, but I'm absolutely certain that happens. Very few, my feeling is that very few people give to charity without telling anyone, or without expecting some thanks from someone. So that it was, Jeannie is a very proud character, and that's really what I was trying to explore.
No, I think that rings entirely true. I mean, this is a kind of silly example, but I noticed that, if you're on social media at the moment, there's a trend for stories of adopting dogs or animals, or saving animals that are somehow in distress, and always these viral clips end with the animal somehow expressing gratitude. A dolphin does a flip in the air to show that it's thankful for being freed from a net, or the dog is somehow grateful. And I think that is very important for people to see charity as somehow being rewarded. And I guess that's always through thanks, and that sort of sense of the recipient somehow abasing themselves, I suppose. But to shift a little bit topically, I mean, most of the novel, almost all of it, is set within the village of Inkbourne and its surrounds, and it's very detailed and well realized location. It's very vividly depicted, and I wondered, does Inkbourne resemble somewhere that you live? Are you writing, I suppose, from what you know, or did you find a different place? You mentioned before the caravan or the camper trailer, as I think that people call it in America.
The camper trailer is near where I live, but Inkbourne, as I call it, is probably I'm not sure about. In my mind, it's about 50 miles north of where I live, in the North Wessex Downs, which is a very beautiful area of England, kind of to the west of Newbury, and crosses the Berkshire-Wiltshire border. And I'd decided that this is where the book was going to be set. It's an area that I do know a little bit, but I did go there once I had decided the book was going to be set there. I went there for a weekend and drove down every single little lane that I could find and took pictures and decided, right, this is where the Rawson's farm is, this is where the cottage is, so that I could see it in my mind. But I kind of chose it really because I had heard about this village called Inkpen, which I just thought is such a lovely name and such a great name for a village. And I went there, and that's in this area, but it's in Berkshire, and it's a very wealthy village. There's lots of horse owners and stables, and you can just see that it would not be the right kind of village for this book. But then if you cross over the border into Wiltshire, you can see that there is a lot less money, not only by individuals, but from the councils and things. You think there's a town called Devizes, which is slightly further west that they go to, and it is quite a rundown town. It does feel quite a poor town. But anyway, once I decided that Inkpen was not right, I went further into Wiltshire, and I found a village called Shelbourne. But that also wasn't quite right. And also because I was creating this village myself, really, and messing around with it, it didn't feel right to base it completely on Shelbourne, because I wanted it to have different things that Shelbourne didn't have. So I just merged the two, really, and had Inkbourne. So I got my kind of little bit of Inkpen in there and Shelbourne in there. Yeah.
No, I do love that. One other thing, and I think that this plays very well into that sense of rural England, is the way that the novel is sort of humming with music, and specifically traditional English music. So there's one particular song, Polly Vaughan, that sort of haunts the text. Could you talk a little bit about, I suppose, the twins' relationship with music? And actually, there was a great quote in the Wall Street Journal about this. I'm just going to read it very quickly. It described Jeannie and Julius as seeming trapped in the timeless and tragic world of folklore. Do you agree?
Yeah, I guess for the first part of the book, I don't know if they're trapped in folklore, but they do feel trapped in time, in an earlier time, and so when they have to escape that, it's like they have travelled in time, and they just don't know how to deal with any of these things that they come across, that everyone else is dealing with in the modern world. So yeah, I can kind of see that. And the music, really, so Julius plays the fiddle and Jeannie plays the guitar, and their mother Dot, when she was alive, played the banjo. I was never quite sure about the banjo, but I left it in because I love the banjo, but it is quite an American instrument rather than an old English folk instrument. But I just thought, no one has ever questioned me about that, so I feel like I might have got away with it. I hope so. And they play together at home, and for me, the music between Jeannie and Julius, for a lot of it, is another way of them communicating without using words. So there's a point in the book at Dot's wake when their sitting room or their kitchen is full of people, and Jeannie is at one end and Julius is at the other, and Jeannie wants to kind of call Julius to him, but she's too much of a shy person to call across the room. So she plays her guitar, and he hears it and he comes, so there is a kind of communication between them that is also expressed sometimes in their twinness, in the way that they can understand what each other's thinking, their thoughts. But also, I think the music, I wanted to use it to show that Jeannie was very clever, very skilled at something, because she had failed at school, or school had failed her, and she'd left as soon as she could, and she'd left without any qualifications, and she'd left without being able to read or write. I didn't want the reader to think that she was a stupid woman. And I hope that the music shows that she absolutely isn't, and to some extent the gardening as well. But when she plays and when she sings, people stop and they listen. And it also provides a tiny, tiny little drop of hope, I think, at the end, that that there is the potential for her to do something with her music. I don't actually think that she ever would, but just having that possibility there is, gives it a slightly more positive ending. Mm-hmm. And it is quite a sad book. It is quite a bleak book, but I hope that the music lifts it and brings a little bit of joy.
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I was very intrigued actually by the way that you describe them as existing almost in some kind of time warp, or they're moved into the future upon the death of their mother. I mean, I wonder if that maybe brings us to, sorry, I've just got an eye on the time, and I should say to anyone watching that if you would like to ask a question, then do please type it in. I will read out these questions and put them to Claire. So if you do have any questions, then please do pop them into the chat box now. You can either send them to panelists or you can send them to everyone, but just type the question in and I will come to you. But just one more question that I want to ask before I get to that. So the timeless nature of Jeannie and Julius's previous existence, it doesn't fit very well into the modern day TV soundtrack existence of their friend Bridget, who takes them in briefly, and that contrast is really striking. I wonder, could you talk a little bit about the friction between these characters?
Between Bridget and Jeannie and Julius.
And Jeannie, and I suppose to me it felt like a sort of clash of lifestyles and even philosophies.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's quite interesting that, I think earlier you said that Dot is quite an interesting character because she's never actually on the page. She's just, because she's dead. So people talk about her in a very positive way mostly, but they all see different aspects of her. So I think it's quite interesting that Dot was friends with Bridget, and yet Dot also obviously lived with Jeannie and Julius in this very isolated, backward way. And yet she would have gone round to Bridget's house when she was alive and spent a lot of time in her house with her telly and her TV dinners and her microwave and her washing machine, dishwasher. So that makes, for me, Dot kind of even more ambiguous, that she moved between these worlds. There is conflict there, I think, but ultimately I think Bridget is warm-hearted and wants to help Jeannie, but is kind of frustrated by her. And Jeannie is equally frustrated by Bridget. And I think, there is a kind of clash of cultures and ideology and philosophy or whatever, but also just quite kind of practical stuff. So Jeannie is frustrated when Bridget doesn't rinse the rice in order to cook it. And I think a lot of that comes if you're adults and you suddenly have to move in together. That doesn't usually work, I don't think. Mm. Because people are set in their ways. They have certain ways of doing things. And Bridget doesn't really want Jeannie there, and Jeannie doesn't want to be there. And Jeannie knows she has to be the guest, and Bridget is trying to make Jeannie feel at home, but none of it, you can just see that it doesn't work. I writing Bridget was a real joy. She did actually make me laugh. She does the Chicken Tonight dance. I don't know if you remember that advert. Does that round the kitchen, and Jeannie has no idea what she's talking about. But then probably any younger readers of this novel, you included, might not know that. I don't know, but it was funny.
We do have a question come in from Becky, and she asks, how often do you cut secondary characters or subplots from books? And I would love to know that too.
Not that often. Sometimes I will merge secondary characters, so that if it feels like two secondary characters are doing the same job, then I will merge them. I don't think that happened in Unsettled Ground, but I know that's happening in the book that I'm writing now, and I'm sure I did that in swimming lessons. So it doesn't happen very often, but you do have to realize that you can't have a character in there just because you like them or they're fun or they're interesting. They in a very subtle way, they do have to have a function. So they do have to come up against the main character in some way and make them think, make them change, make them do something unexpected. They have to have a role. And if you realize that two characters are doing the same thing, then you can kind of squash them together. But it is painful to do that, especially if you really like them. But I'm quite strong. Make sure that they're all there usefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got another question here. Jeannie and Julius's belongings were removed from the cottage and set out in front of the road. In front of the road of the cottage. It was so painful to read of Jeannie's discovery that her belongings were taken away before she was able to move them. Was this a difficult turning point for you to include in the story?
No more than any of the other awful things I put them through. I don't think that was particularly difficult. What I really liked from writing that scene was imagining that all these belongings and the things that had been in their house for so many years in their dark corners and then were out on the lane, and how that would feel for any of us, to take the contents of your house and put it outside for anybody to see. And what would be the things that you would be ashamed of? Jeannie is ashamed of I think there's a chipped chamber pot, and I can't remember the description, but it's about all the kind of worn things, and a box of shoes that don't match, and things that you probably should have got rid of years ago. And for me, the book is an awful lot about belongings and objects, and the objects that you lose along the way. So Jeannie starts with a cottage full of things. The objects end up on the road. She can't take all of them with her to Bridget's, so she can only take a selection, and then some of that comes to the caravan, and then when she leaves the caravan she can only take 2 carrier bags. So if you're reducing your belongings by half each time, what do you take with you? I thought that was quite an interesting thing to think about. I don't have an answer really, but
no. And the one other thing I suppose I wanted to ask, I think this book, dealing with themes of poverty as it does, and with characters who sort of deal with things that are quite deeply researched, as you've told us about. I mean, it could be read as a political book. I mean, do you have any feelings about that, or do you feel that you have or have not inserted a sort of message that you would like the book to impart?
I didn't set out to do that, and even kind of by the end of the book, if that message comes across, then that's a great secondary thing. It's more important to me that this is a well-written story that people are interested in Jeannie and Julius, rather than a message. But I do feel that it has from the feedback I've got, I feel like it has opened people's eyes to rural poverty in England, particularly, that they had not considered before, and how the changes to the countryside, both in terms of things being removed and the kinds of people moving into it who can afford to live there and can afford to have 2 cars and lots of technology, for the people who can't, what life is like. And so in that way, if people, there's no message, but if it makes people think about that, then I think that's a great thing. And also if it makes people think about illiteracy and adult illiteracy, which I did some research about while I was writing it, and in England 5% of adults have a reading age of 5 or below.
Wow.
And on another event, another US event, somebody went away and looked up what the US percentage was for that, and it was something like 21%. So I think people need to know about that as well.
Yes, because I think where you talk about the sort of strategies that Jeannie has developed so as to get around this in life, I think that really brings the character to life and helps sort of illustrate how one might get by and how it could in many situations not be an issue.
Yeah.
Hello, Vicky.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi. It was really delightful to hear you talking about your book. It is 5 minutes before the hour, so it's time for us to wind down. And Cal, your interview and your questions were spot on. The book is it means so much more to me now. I'll just say that. But we've reached the top of the hour. Claire Fuller and Cal Flyn, thank you so much for joining us here at Home with Literati this evening. And thanks to our viewers as well. If you do wish to buy the book, you can go to literatibookstore.com, and at the top where the search bar is, you can type in the name of the book, Unsettled Ground, and click on it and either have it shipped to you, or you can arrange to come in the store and pick it up. And the link is also in the chat. I want to thank you two so much. It was really a pleasure to get to see you in person, Claire, and to meet you, Cal. And now I'll let you two say thank you and goodbye, and then we'll be done at 6 o'clock. I mean, at 7 o'clock. Right. Thank you again. I will turn off my
I want to say thanks, Cal. Definitely, they're really, really insightful questions, and this is number 11 or 12 of the events, and for the first time there's some different questions. Really, really, really interesting things. So thank you very much.
No, wonderful. An absolute pleasure, because I really love this book. As I said at the beginning, I'm just so glad that it's getting all this recognition, and I just feel great things are going to happen with it. So congratulations for writing it, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, and thank you for coming, everyone. Okay.